I'm 34 years old, a woman, and grew up in a traditional South Asian family, established for decades in Northern California. In my home, success was synonymous with stability: college at Stanford or Berkeley, a good husband chosen with criteria, two well-behaved children, and a house no more than 30 minutes from my parents. So they could help on weekends and, of course, discreetly supervise whether the pantry was well stocked with saffron and cumin. But I began deviating from this script much earlier than expected. At 21, I switched from biomedicine to design. At 25, I turned down an internship in San Francisco to accept a permanent job at a branding agency in Stockholm. At 27, I quit everything again and went to Paris, where I began working as a freelance visual identity consultant. Since then, I've become a nomad. According to my parents, especially my mother, this isn't a real life. Remote consulting? Translation: unemployed. Living in another time zone? You're running away from something. And every time we talked by video or call, it was like filling out an eternal job interview, justifying every step I took, as if I were a rebellious teenager, not an adult woman with a stable career and my own apartment in Montmartre. But none of this bothered me as much as my love life. They always suspected. I never introduced anyone. I never brought a nice boy to Sunday dinner. And when I calmly told them I was in a serious relationship, my mother's first reaction was, "And why have we never heard about him before? Is he even real?" I laughed, thinking it was a joke. But she was serious. My father, in silence, just frowned. To them, the French boyfriend I'd been posting vague photos with on Instagram was more urban legend than someone real. I had been dating Eric for almost 2 years. He works with executive aviation, a kind of route and logistics consultant for companies that operate private jets between Europe, the Middle East, and Africa. He had worked for Saudi princes, UN directors, CEOs of brands my mother wouldn't even know how to pronounce. But I never shared the details. Not out of secrecy, out of self-preservation. And that's why when I received the invitation to spend Christmas with my family, after avoiding these dates for nearly 5 years, I hesitated. It was my chance to try to reconnect. But, of course, the invitation came with my mother's typical touch. If your boyfriend wants to leave the world of imagination and appear, he'll be welcome. With a smiling emoji. Always the smiling emoji. Eric and I had already planned to travel to the United States during the holidays. He had a meeting in Dubai days before, and I would fly directly to California, where my parents still lived, in Fremont. He said he would meet me on Christmas Eve, arriving no more than an hour or two late, if the private flight he was catching from Paris to San Francisco wasn't delayed. I thought it was excessive, but he insisted. In my head, I already knew what awaited me. The looks, the fake smiles, the comments that tasted like poison. I was the eccentric daughter, the disappointing one, the one who invented international romances to feel important. But at that Christmas dinner, I was willing to listen to everything in silence. Everything. Until he arrived. I arrived around 7. The house was already full in both the emotional and physical sense. Neighbors, second cousins, uncles I hadn't seen since high school, and even my sister's former violin teacher were scattered around, among platters of aromatic rice and westernized canapes. The Christmas tree looked more like a store window sculpture. White, silvery, without a single crooked ball made by a child. My mother wore a red sari with golden embroidery and a necklace I knew only came out of the box for events with group photo potential. My father circulated with a glass of whiskey and his neutral smile of a restrained host. "She came," shouted Aunt Mina, hugging me as if I had been resurrected. "And still without the French prince?" I smiled. I didn't answer. I entered the house with a gift for my parents under my arm, a set of blue porcelain plates that Eric had personally chosen in a store in Paris, and handed it to my mother. She said thank you, with a look that lasted half a second and a head movement that could have been a nod or a tick. During the first half hour, I was bombarded with questions coated in burnt sugar. Still living in Paris? And that sustainable fashion project? Does that make money? Have you thought about coming back here? Or freezing your eggs? With each comment, I said, or all good, thanks, and mentally sank into the sofa, hoping Eric would send a message. He didn't. My sister, Sarah, appeared shortly after. She was the right daughter. Recently promoted at a multinational, engaged to a guy who works with renewable energy and takes my parents to lunch on Sundays. She wore a pearl-colored dress that probably cost half my rent and smiled like someone who knows she's winning. During the table setup for dinner, I noticed they had left an extra chair, but at the back. It was for me. 8 places around the main table. Mine on the side of the end. I wasn't surprised. It was symbolic. I was there, but not exactly. Sitting in that cold chair, between the crystal cabinet and the decorated tree, I heard my mother begin the classic Christmas toast. May this new year bring wisdom, health, and she laughed. Perhaps a real boyfriend for certain people here at the table. Someone let out a restrained chuckle. I looked to the side. My uncle pretended to scratch his chin. "Mom," said my sister, half scolding, half amused. "What?" she replied, with that air of, "I'm just kidding. If he really exists, it would be good for him to show up one day, right?" The knife was cutting the turkey, but also my last drop of patience. I could have stood up. I could have snapped back. But I smiled. I swallowed hard. And I waited. That's when the intercom rang. Once, twice. My father got up to answer. And my mother commented, laughing quietly, "Must be the fantasy Uber arriving." Seconds later, the door opened. And everyone heard footsteps. Firm footsteps. A woody perfume scent filled the air. A long black coat, snow still melting on the shoulders. A cashmere scarf around the neck. And a medium-sized, rectangular box with a thin blue satin ribbon. Eric was standing at the entrance, with a slight smile and his gaze directed at me. "Sorry for the delay," he said, with a light but firm accent. "I almost missed the private flight leaving Paris. But I couldn't help delivering this today." The room went silent. Completely. He walked up to me, bent down slightly, handed me the gift, and kissed my forehead. "Merry Christmas, mon amour." I was still sitting. But that night, even without standing up, it was as if I had finally stood tall. For 2 seconds, maybe 3, no one said a word. It was as if time had slipped between the blinking lights of the tree and the muffled sound of the television turned on in the next room. The smell of cinnamon, cloves, and roasted turkey still lingered in the air, but had lost its warmth. Everything now seemed suspended. Frozen. Eric smiled, like someone who didn't notice the tension. But of course he noticed. He noticed everything. It was a habit of people who deal with airports, operations directors, time zone changes, and last-minute deadlines, reading the environment in 2 seconds and responding with millimetric precision. "Good evening, everyone," he said, in a polite, articulate, but not robotic English. "I'm Eric. I finally had the pleasure of arriving. I hope I didn't interrupt anything important." My mother was still standing next to the turkey, the knife frozen in the air. Her smile now seemed to have been sculpted in plaster. "Oh, of course. Welcome," she said, her eyes blinking rapidly. "Come in." Eric approached the center of the table and placed the gift box on the sideboard. "I brought something special for the lady of the house," he said, looking at my mother. "Carefully chosen in Montmartre." She hesitated. Perhaps she thought of reflexively refusing, but her polite gesture won over instinct. "Thank you. It's very kind." "I hope you like it," he replied simply. My sister stared at him, as if trying to solve an impossible puzzle. Her fiancé, sitting beside her, raised his eyebrows. My father cleared his throat, disconcerted, and took 2 steps forward, extending his hand. "Mr. Eric, welcome to our home." "Please, just Eric. Sir makes it seem like I aged 10 years on the flight," he replied, firmly shaking my father's hand. A few discreet laughs sounded. Relief. Someone finally broke the tension. A cousin in the corner muttered something about his coat, looking like it came from a movie. Another commented, quietly, "He looks like an actor." "Dinner was already being served," said my mother, still regaining her tone of command. "But I can heat something up for you. If there's any of that almond rice I smelled in the air left, I'm in heaven," he replied. "But only if it's not a bother." She blinked. "Of course. It's no trouble. I'll help make a plate for him," I quickly said and stood up. We went to the kitchen in silence. I closed the door behind us. "You came," I whispered. "You thought I wouldn't," he replied, lifting the lid of the rice dish. "This smells incredible." They were frozen. "I noticed," he said, with a smile at the corner of his mouth. "But I came for you." I stood for a few seconds looking at him. Coat still on, hair slightly disheveled, hands moving naturally among the dishes. As if that kitchen were his. As if that Christmas were ours. "They thought you didn't exist," I confessed, putting rice on the plate. "I do exist. And I really appreciate your courage in keeping me where I've always been, close to you, even at a distance." My eyes filled up, but I didn't let them overflow. There, alone with him, I realized how much I had grown accustomed to defending myself, to justifying myself, and how much it took just one person showing up for real to dismantle all the jokes, all the insinuations. We returned to the room together, him beside me,
Not behind.
not as a supporting actor, as part of who I am. And for the first time, no one dared make any jokes at my expense. When we returned to the dining room, conversation had resumed, or at least was trying to. The words sounded polite, but came like mounted trenches. No one wanted to be the first to make a mistake. The first to say something Eric might consider rude. Or worse, that I could use as ammunition. My mother adjusted the silverware as if it were a jewelry store, each fork in its exact symmetrical position. My father served wine to others as if he were acting in a cordiality advertising campaign. And my sister, Sarah, played with the edge of her glass like someone trying to keep emotions silent. Eric sat down next to me, even though he was invited to occupy one of the central chairs. He declined politely. I prefer to stay here. I like having the best view of the most beautiful woman of the night, he said. One of the aunts discreetly choked on her water. A cousin laughed without looking at anyone. Sarah rolled her eyes. So, Eric, my father began. You work in aviation? That's right. Today, more in the planning and operational security part. I help companies organize private flight routes in regions with more delicate logistics, he explained, between one forkful and another. But I started as a pilot at 22. Private flights? Asked an uncle with an expression between fascination and distrust. For whom? Various clients. Diplomatic teams, artists, businessmen. Many people who value agility and discretion. The word fell like a whisper. The same word my mother had so often used to accuse me of hiding things. Of being too closed. Of never trusting her with the serious parts of my life. That sounds interesting, my mother finally said.
Yes.
It's a small world, but full of stories. I just can't tell many of them, he smiled. My sister, who until then had only been observing, decided to speak. And how did you two meet? It was in a cafe in Paris, I answered. A rainy day. He took the last croissant, and I almost snatched it from his hand. I offered half, said Eric. She accepted, but then ate all of it. Some laughed. Others just looked. But the effort was visible. Eyes trying to accept what didn't fit the script everyone had already rehearsed in their heads. They wanted to see him as exaggerated, arrogant, or fake. But he wasn't any of that. He was just firm.
Real.
At a certain point, my mother got up from the table and went to the kitchen. I stood still for a moment until I realized she was taking too long. I followed her. She was standing in front of the sink, hands resting on it, as if she needed to breathe before returning. Is everything okay? I asked. She didn't answer immediately. Then, without looking at me, he is handsome. Yes, I know. And polite. I know that too. She slowly turned her face. Why did you never tell me it was so serious? I took a deep breath. The question wasn't new, but said in that tone, that night, it sounded different. It wasn't a demand. It was almost astonishment, like someone looking at something that had always been there, but only now allowing themselves to see it. Because you never believed, I replied. In anything that wasn't what you planned for me. She lowered her eyes. She didn't counter. And that, coming from her, was practically an apology. You're very much like your grandmother, she murmured. And I never knew how to deal with that. I remained silent. That was a lot. And at the same time little. But it was a beginning. Perhaps for the first time in years. Before I could respond, Eric appeared at the door with 2 glasses of sparkling wine. Is everything all right here? He asked, with a slight smile. Yes, I answered. Everything is different. We returned to the room slowly, in silence, like people returning from a crossing. The dinner continued, but the atmosphere was different. Less rehearsed. Less tense. People were already speaking to Eric without measuring their words so much, even if it still sounded like a collective test, as if everyone wanted to find the flaw in the charm. But he seemed immune. He asked about the recipes of the night, complimented the Christmas decoration, and showed genuine interest when one of the uncles started talking about the time he missed a flight to Miami and slept on the airport floor. He laughed as if he were among old friends. Natural. Completely at ease. This, more than any gift, was what dismantled the armor of the people in that room. Can I open the present now? I asked, pointing to the blue box on the sideboard. That's what Christmas is for, isn't it? Said Eric, crossing his arms, as if hiding something. I picked up the box carefully, but there was no need. The ribbon came loose with a light pull, and inside, a gunmetal gray wool scarf with burgundy details, soft as a cloud, perfectly folded over a smaller wooden box. In the box, a silver necklace with a star-shaped pendant, with a small white stone in the center. It's a snowflake, he said. It's discreet, but unique. Like you. I stood for a few seconds just looking. This is beautiful. I wanted you to know that, even when I'm not near, you've always been visible to me, he replied calmly. Even when your family couldn't see. My chest tightened. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. I just hugged.
Tightly.
Without saying anything. I didn't need to. The gesture already said what language couldn't reach. My mother, who was observing from afar, took half a step forward. It is beautiful, she said. Thank you, I replied, without taking my eyes off Eric. Sarah appeared soon after with a dessert plate. Mom, would you like pudding? My mother hesitated. Later. I'm not hungry right now. That caught me by surprise. My mother never refused pudding, but at that moment, she seemed more occupied with thoughts than with taste. And I realized something in her had broken or started to break. A kind of hard pride that, gradually, became too uncomfortable even for herself. My father passed by with a bottle of wine, offering to fill Eric's glass. A Frenchman likes wine, right? Eric thanked him with a smile. Very much. But today, I'm falling in love with your wife's cashew juice. Real laughter echoed through the room. For the first time that night, the sound was light. It wasn't tense.
It wasn't forced.
It was the laughter of those who, even without admitting it, were beginning to accept that maybe I wasn't a detour from the path. Later, already on the sofa, with the necklace around my neck and the scarf folded over my knees, I leaned back against Eric. He played with my hair, distracted. That was intense, I murmured. It was beautiful, he corrected, because it was all of you, without editing anything. The party was beginning to disperse, but I didn't want to sleep or leave. I just wanted to stay there, between the lit fireplace, the blinking lights on the veranda, and the certainty that, for the first time in years, I wasn't the shame of the night. I was presence. The night was slowly dying. The Christmas lights were still blinking rhythmically, but the house was emptier, quieter. The guests had left gradually one by one, taking with them the poorly disguised astonishment, the cut-off whispers, and, deep down, a discomfort I knew well. The discomfort of reviewing a story that had already been considered closed. My sister and her fiancé were the last to leave. She gave me a quick kiss on the cheek, like someone who was still processing everything. Her fiancé shook Eric's hand with respect, perhaps even admiration, and wished happy holidays like an executive greeting an important client. My father was locking the front door, while my mother collected the plates with the automatic movements of someone who wants to appear too busy to feel anything. Eric and I were still sitting on the sofa. The room seemed different, and perhaps it was. My mother passed near the Christmas tree, and, for a moment, her eyes met mine through the reflection in the cabinet mirror. She looked away, but not quickly enough. Eric stood up. Would you like me to help with the dishes? My mother stopped, staring at him for a second. The proposal, coming from a man, a foreigner, and moreover a guest, seemed to briefly leave her without a social code. No need. I'll take care of it, she replied. But thank you. Then I'll put away the dishes on the table. I can at least do that. He collected 2 plates before she could stop him, and headed to the kitchen. We were alone. The tree was blinking behind me. He is kind, she said, without emotion. He is everything you thought didn't exist, I replied, more firmly than I had planned. She took a deep breath. It's not that. I just didn't imagine he was real. Because you never asked. You always presumed. She sat down slowly on the arm of the chair, without looking directly at me. When you were little, you said you wanted to live in another country. I thought it was a phase. That you would change. Come back. But you didn't come back. I remained silent. Sometimes, silence answers better than any argument. I didn't understand your choice, of course. I didn't understand you leaving secure jobs. And even less did I understand spending Christmas alone for so many years. But today, I understood one thing. She turned her face, finally looking at me. I don't need to understand everything to respect it. That disarmed me. I wanted to say something, but nothing came out. She got up again, impatient with her own vulnerability, and walked to the tree. "The gift he gave me," she said, handling the box. "A scarf. Blue, with gold details. Did you know?"
No.
"It's just like the one your grandmother wore. The one in her wedding photo. Do you think it was a coincidence?" I thought for a second. "I think he saw you, even without ever knowing you. Maybe that's why you found it so strange." She smiled, half cynical, half touched. "Maybe." Eric appeared at the kitchen door, wiping his hands on a dish towel. "Dishes done. Now can I earn points as a grade A guest?" "You already have, Eric," she replied, surprising us both. "You have for some time now." He winked at me, and I returned with the smile I had kept all night. It wasn't a smile of revenge. It was relief. The feeling of, for the first time, fitting into my own story without having to apologize for it. The house was almost empty when Sarah returned. She said she forgot her phone, but as soon as she crossed the door, it was clear she wanted more than a forgotten device. She used the same tone of voice as when we were teenagers, and she needed to find out if I had read her diary. Curious, attentive, slightly suspicious. "You're still here?" she asked, looking around. "Eric is going to sleep at a nearby hotel." "I stayed to help with things," I replied, neutral. She walked around the room, eyes on the gift boxes, on the neatly stacked plates. My father had already gone upstairs. My mother was in the bedroom. Eric was in the garden, on the phone. "So it's true, isn't it?" she said, stopping in front of me. "He exists. He always existed. You all just preferred not to believe." She crossed her arms, as she always did when she wanted to say something difficult. "It's not that. It's just that he appeared. Just like that, out of nowhere. And everything is so perfect." "You mean he doesn't seem real?" "I mean he doesn't seem like anything. He is. He's handsome, elegant, intelligent. Has an accent. Has a job that no one understands, which makes him even more interesting. Brought a present for Mom. And on top of all that, washed dishes." "What are you trying to say, Sarah?" She hesitated. She went to the cabinet mirror, touched her own hair. An automatic, nervous gesture. That for the first time, I was the invisible sister. That paralyzed me. "Me?" I asked, unable to hide my astonishment. "It was just today, calm down," she replied, laughing awkwardly. "But it was strange. You've always been the model daughter, the perfect fiancée, the pride of the family, the reference. And now you're telling me that it hurt," she cut in simply. "Because I was used to shining. And you appeared. Not just with an incredible guy, but with a life that you built your own way.
Alone.
And that's something I never knew how to do." I hadn't expected that. Not from Sarah. But there was no irony in her voice. Just confession. "I never wanted to compete with you," I said quietly. "I know. But I competed anyway." She picked up her phone from the table. She pressed the button as if that ended the conversation. But before leaving, she turned again. "He likes you very much. That's impossible to fake. Even for someone like me, who always thought she knew everything." And she left, without anything more. Eric returned soon after, still with the scarf around his neck and the calm smile of someone who seemed to have won the night. "Everything okay here?" "Yes," I replied. "Something's even more okay than I expected." He came closer and rested his chin on top of my head. "The model sister is gone?"
Yes.
But today she saw the other side of the coin. "And you?" "Me?" I saw the whole reflection. The night had already turned into dawn when I sat alone on the back porch, wrapped in the scarf Eric gave me. The air was freezing, but the kind of cold that awakens, that clears the mind. The house behind me was silent. Even the blinking lights had already been turned off. Christmas was officially over. But for me, it still burned inside. Eric would come to pick me up shortly to go together to the hotel. My suitcase was already packed. I was already ready. And not in the literal sense, but emotionally. I had no idea what would happen after that Christmas. If my mother would try to get closer. If my sister would go back to talking as if nothing had happened. If my father would one day say he was proud. But for the first time, all of that mattered less than it should. I didn't want revenge. Or an audience. I just wanted peace. And, surprisingly, I found it there. Among stacked plates, cut-off glances, and a carefully chosen gift. At the moment Eric walked through the door saying he almost missed the private flight from Paris, it wasn't just him who arrived. I arrived too. My mother appeared shortly after. She was wearing a light robe and slippers. She looked tired, but not of me. It was a good tired, of someone who carried too many weights and began to let them go. "Isn't it cold out there?" she asked, sitting next to me on the porch bench. "A little, but it's a good cold." We sat in silence for a while. She adjusted the sleeve of her robe. I looked at the sky, dark, clear. No visible stars, but all present. "Are you leaving tomorrow?" she asked.
Yes.
"We'll spend New Year's Eve in New York with some friends of his. Then we'll go back to Paris." She nodded. "And are you really together? I mean, thinking about the future?" I smiled slightly. "Mom, we're already living the present together. The future, we build it. Without a checklist." She took a second before responding. "I just wish you had let me see this before. I tried, many times, but you were always busy correcting me." She lowered her eyes. "I was afraid." "Of what?" "Of losing you to a world I didn't understand." We stayed there just breathing. Then, she extended her hand over mine. "Thank you for coming. And for not giving up on me." "I came for myself, Mom. Not for you. But I'm glad it was worth it." She squeezed my hand, without saying anything more. For the first time, that was enough. Eric appeared shortly after, with keys in hand and hair tousled by the wind. He looked at me, then at her. "Ready?" "Always," I answered. I stood up. I picked up the small backpack I had left beside the bench. And when I walked with him to the car, I realized I wasn't leaving. I was just going home. Behind me, my mother was still sitting, looking ahead. She wasn't crying. She wasn't smiling. She was just breathing, like someone who knows that something inside her and inside us has changed. And perhaps from now on, this will be our Christmas. Not the one with the perfect tree or the perfect family, but the Christmas in which, finally, I was real. Did you like the story? Leave it in the comments and don't forget to subscribe to the channel.